Much, Peter, and thank you to your panelists for that important contribution to our Leaders Summit and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Next up is a session organised by our Global Compact local networks in the Eastern European region on climate change and a just transition. Over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this regional roundtable on climate change and a just transition. I'm Pavlo Sheremeta. I'm the former Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine, and I'll be moderating this great session organized by Global Compact local networks in Georgia, Ukraine, Poland, and Turkey. The COVID-19 crisis exposed the necessity to build the resilience of countries by accelerating their transition from a gray to a green economy. Profound transformations are needed in countries across the world and in Eastern Europe region to roll out long-term strategies in line with the Paris Agreement. Commitments and policies must be aligned with enabling decent work and quality jobs, strengthening institutional capacity to develop climate resilient infrastructure, and recognize the challenges faced by sectors, cities, regions in transformation from fossil fuels. On this roundtable, we will hear both from government and business on their readiness across the region of Eastern Europe, I should say Central and Eastern Europe, having Poland with us, pursue ambitious climate goals, reinforce each other, and ensure a just transition, embracing climate, social, and energy justice. We will also hear from the representatives of the United Nations and international financial institution on the trends and what needs to be done at the road ahead. We are lucky to have 8 great speakers with us today. With that in mind, we'll need to keep the interventions limited to hear from various perspectives. Given video limitations, we'll hear first from our, at the moment, I see first 3 speakers, it's 4 with me, representing the government, and then from our next 5 speakers, well, hopefully the UN representative will join us in the first part, if not then in the second part. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce the first 4 esteemed speakers. First of all, Małgorzata Jaroszynska-Jedynak, Minister of Development Funds and Regional Policy, Poland. Hello, Madam Minister. Levan Davitashvili, Minister for Environmental Protection and Agriculture, Georgia. Kamarchoba, Mr. Minister. Yaroslav Demchenkov, the Deputy Yaroslav Demchenkov, the Deputy Minister of Energy and Environmental Protection, Ukraine. Dobry den, Pane Ministra. Hello, Mr. Minister. We are waiting for Madam Irena Voyachkova-Solorano, Director of Development Coordination Office for Europe and Central Asia. Hopefully she will join us as soon as she can, but having the 3 ministers with us at the moment, let me first ask the question to Madam Jaroszynska. Madam Minister, can you please tell us what the policy transformation needed and what is being rolled out in Poland to meet the European Green Deal and ensure that no one is left behind in the process?
Thank you very much, and hello, everybody. In Poland, we attach great importance to achieving ambitious climate goals outlined in the Paris Agreement. Our strategic documents, namely the Strategy for Responsible Development, National Strategy for Regional Development, and National Urban Policy, provide an adequate response to climate challenges. We also are actively engaged in the transition process, hand in hand with other member states of the European Union. Now we are at the heart of the discussion over European Green Deal. Climate transformation, together with digitalization, will be the pillars of the European recovery plan to restore our economies after COVID-19 pandemic. We understand climate neutrality as a collective goal, taking into account different starting points and potentials. For Poland, achieving this goal is a cost-effective and just manner is a key issue. The Polish energy system still is very much dependent on coal. We have the highest share of solid in the energy mix among all member states, and there are no nuclear power plants in Poland. The value of investments needs to reach the reduction target by 2013 amounts to 240 billion euros. To achieve climate neutrality, Poland will have to bear additional costs twice as high as the EU average. In our debate, we shouldn't ignore that high socioeconomic costs of achieving climate neutrality and the security of energy supply. We should act at 4 levels: ensure the ongoing key projects, strengthen critical sectors in achieving climate neutrality, boost innovation, and protect those most affected. The slowdown and recovery shouldn't be at the expense of the poorest. We need the EU-wide measure to create an area of security so that those poorest and most vulnerable wouldn't have to bear the costs of recovery and transition to a climate neutral Europe. We are of the opinion that natural gas technologies bridge the gap between traditional coal technologies and technologies based fully on renewable energy sources. As the Minister for Regional Policy, I cannot forget about another specific issue. Climate change will also affect the dynamic of urban development and thus the quality of life of their inhabitants. For several years, Poland has been undertaking intensive activities to support the ecological and pro-climate transformation of cities. We implemented a number of strategic projects and horizontal actions. For instance, the government program called Clean Air to improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions through modernization of heating facilitates in householders. And I would like to also mention about the next World Urban Forum will take place in Poland in 2022 in Katowice. And I believe that this place, this forum, will be also the unique opportunity to take a comprehensive look at the challenges for cities, for business, related to climate change and environmental quality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I'm very happy to see Mrs. Irena Wojciechowska-Solorano with us, the Regional Director of the UN Development Coordination Office for Europe and Central Asia. Mrs. Wojciechowska-Solorano, if you don't mind, we will proceed with the introductory remarks, the 3 minutes. Instead of making an introduction, I will ask you to do the conclusion. Would that be okay with you?
It will be okay. I apologize for being late. I was in another webinar where we got hacked. So things got complicated.
That's no problem.
So my big apologies.
That's no problem. We proceed from Warsaw to Tbilisi, and Mr. Levan Davitashvili, the Minister of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia. The question to you is, similarly, we look forward to hearing what are the transformations are needed and already being done in Georgia regarding the climate change and the just transition.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and dear friends, first of all, before responding to the question, let me address the social injustice and emphasize that we have to unite and build a better world, one free of discrimination and violence, ensuring that no one is left behind. And of course, I have to underline that we are all facing a fast recovery after COVID-19. And this recovery should be, of course, climate friendly and sustainable. This is very important. And we have to also remember that implementing the climate policy, we have to still keep these commitments that we had before COVID-19 started. Actually, in March, in February, in different countries, it was in different time. Of course, all these states before 2020 actually have common responsibility to communicate more ambitious, updated national determined contributions, and not only this, also long-term low emissions development strategies. We as a country, of course, are in the process of preparing new NDC, and also we are working on long-term development, long-term low emission development strategy that will be presented very soon to the government, and I hope that before 2020 it will be also sent to UNFCCC. As related to the question, what are actual transformations that are being done in Georgia? We know our transitional economy, like other countries around this round table. And it's not only one sector, but different sectors of the economy are in a transitional process. The updated NDC for Georgia and the climate action plan for its implementation covers 7 different directions of economy. It is energy generation and transmission, first of all. It's waste management. It is construction and building sector, industry, agriculture, forestry, and all of them are in transformation process in order to enable the country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and be decent partner for other countries to achieve temperature goals of Paris Agreement. The most significant step for Georgia was actually developing the National Energy Sector Action Plan, and Georgia has huge natural resources for renewable energy resources. We can use like water resources, solar and wind as renewable energy sources for renewable energy sources. In this regard, country adopted new law on promotion of the use of energy production from renewable resources. The purpose of this law is to establish a legal basis for the promotion and use of energy received from the renewable resources, and also energy performance in buildings. This is also another important legislative act that increase energy savings, energy security, energy independence, as well as improving energy efficiency. Georgia has also adopted National Energy Efficiency Action Plan, and I'm glad that comprehensive reform is also done in the forestry sector, and we recently have adopted new forest code, which is a fundamental document for sustainable forest management. And as we all understand, this can result increasing carbon sink from the forest sector, and of course this can mitigate greenhouse gas emissions in the country. Additionally, transport sector is very important, and we produce new tax incentive. Actually, this is tax exemption rather than incentive that caused substitution of existing private fleet with electric and hybrid transport and vehicles by 42% within a very short period of time. In recent years, agriculture sector is very intensive in terms of production, and not only in terms of production, but also in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, which is not good. And for this, in January 2020, we established a working group in the ministry for climate smart agriculture. And this is a new platform for the communication of different stakeholders in this policy regard. And let me conclude that the government of Georgia is ready to contribute implementation of Paris Agreement, and I'm confident that only joint actions across the international community community are the most important and most valuable, feasible instruments, I would say, for potential to reduce potential threats for human well-being and security. And as we understand that climate change is very complex and is also very, in terms of expenditures, it's very high. Only international cooperation can bring results, and international communication and cooperation, like exchanging experience and best practices, are very valuable for countries like Georgia and countries around the table.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Davitashvili, before we get into international perspective, let's get the perspective from Kyiv, Ukraine. And I would like to introduce Mr. Yaroslav Demchenko once again, the Deputy Minister of Energy and Environmental Protection of Ukraine. Please give us the Ukrainian perspective on these issues, Mr. Minister.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine, I am pleased to join the discussion today. Ukraine is known across the globe as an industrial agrarian country. However, the most unsuccessful attempts to carry out economic reform over the last 20 years have led to closure of many factories, enterprises, and mines. As a result of this deindustrialization and decarbonization actually occurred. Over 20% of industrial enterprises, along with a significant share of the coal industry, are located in the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine as a result of the military action in the east of the country. Many factories are not operational, they are in poor condition, and the ecological situation is critical. Therefore, when CEOs of surviving enterprise hear about additional decarbonization and the closure of mines today, they are outraged and firmly convinced that this action could lead to entire closure, closing, and employment growing and poverty spreading. Only a few of the surviving enterprises can afford to be environmentally friendly and socially responsible. Perhaps Ukraine is also known as the country with the highest green energy tariff, in particular for solar and wind energy. As a result of this generosity, we face significant technical and economical difficulties associated with the accelerated development of renewable energy sources. The urgent problem which we are currently facing is to ensure the stability of the Ukraine's energy system. We experience a lack of maneuvering capacity able to cover peak loads, and we have to admit that this poses a direct threat to the country's energy security. The quite low purchase power of the population is made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. The current situation in Ukraine is characterized by rising unemployment, falling production processes, and declining business activity. Thus, staying on course toward to the development of environmentally friendly renewable energy sources and reducing greenhouse emission in the country, we have to adhere to a balanced policy, ensuring the real economic and financial capability of the country, which has an ongoing conflict in the eastern region. Ukraine shares the objectives of the political initiating the European Commission, the Green Deal. It also happened so Ukraine has started reviewing and updating the provision of the current energy strategy of Ukraine. We are determined to reduce greenhouse gas emission and decarbonizing the economy, so we aim at reflecting the key elements of this European initiative into the new version of the energy strategy. Summarizing the above mentioned, I would like to know that Ukraine is consistently improving its climate legislation, putting it into the practice. The country's leaders have been repeatedly proving their commitments to the principles of sustainable development, which is demonstrated by the measure taken by the government to improve the efficiency of energy consumption, preserve natural ecological system, and combat climate change. An important task is to ensure long-term affordable financing to support the transition in all dimensions and the transfer to the new effective technology. Ukraine is going through difficult times, but we remain optimistic because we have such friends like you. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Mr. Minister Demchenkov. That was perspective from Ukraine. Madam Minister and Ministers, thank you for national perspectives. Let's get into the regional perspective. Mrs. Irena Voyechkova-Solorano, from the perspective of the United Nations, what socio-economic measures are needed in Eastern Europe? With Poland, it should be Central and Eastern Europe, to ensure the green recovery that is anchored in just transition and aligned with the Paris Agreement.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is it?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the word, and again, my apologies for being delayed. It is a great honor to be on the same panel with so important ministers in countries where the policies that are being put in place are so important, because all the countries, they have a long way to go. But without longer-term strategic policies and education of the population, it will be difficult to achieve the target of the Paris Accord that all of you have signed. And of course, the discussions in Katowice that you have referred to are absolutely key for governments to understand. The United Nations is in many of the countries present and is working closely with the governments to create an enabling environment. Enabling environment, first of all, concerning the financing. There are several financing options through the United Nations system, through different funding institutions that are regional or global. And we are working under the leadership of the Secretary General very hard to make the packages as big as possible, especially for countries like the ones presented here, because it is the financial burden on the governments are huge in transforming their energy agenda. The decarbonization, the low emissions, the energy efficiency requires big investments. But we think that besides the financial implications, it's also the social implications that every government has to take into consideration. It's changing jobs. That means that we will have completely different job categories. For this, we need to prepare the population. It does not happen overnight. One has to include the education system to create the new knowledge in the population so that they can contribute with their knowledge to the new technologies, and that countries can produce their own technology and don't depend on imports of different technologies. So it requires an all-government approach. And as we are here talking in the context of Global Compact, definitely it needs a very strong involvement of private sector, because only a legal enabling environment that creates incentives for the private sector to invest into renewable energies and in energy efficiencies, only then the private sector will be pulling along. So it is important that the strategies that governments have are touching all levels of government activities, and that it is well thought through and not only looking at the energy part or the business part, but it needs a change in the whole society. As I said, it's education. That means that there are enough young people that are educated with the right skills, but also it needs changes in agriculture. It needs changes in whole approach of society. In some parts of the world, governments have looked at traditional ways how to produce energy, and looking back might not be such a bad idea often. because there we can do a lot. So I think it is exploring with the whole society what can be done to actually meet the Paris Accord deal that was signed, because when we look at the figures, what is happening to climate change, it is much faster than we thought even 5 years ago. And therefore, education is key. I think in the COVID situation has brought one message home, that we need to learn to listen to science. And also at the beginning of the crisis, it became politics, it became emotional, until governments realized that they just have to listen to science to put the right measures in place. The virus is something short term, but climate change is a similar situation, just very much long term. And we need to learn and educate the population that they have to listen to science, because we are hitting really very hard numbers here. We have, again, this year, the temperatures are the highest that we could ever. And this is something that has to be discussed so that society understands what measures governments have to take into consideration. And it is not about who wins the elections. It is that anybody who wins the elections has to follow the agenda, because otherwise economies will have, within a short time, a hard sell. So this is where we are working very closely with governments to push this agenda, to adapt it to every government's and every society's capacities. But we need to be much stronger and we need to be much faster. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share the UN's perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Wojciechowska-Solorano. We still have 3 minutes before we include the second part of our panel session, panel discussion that will consist of business. So, Your Excellencies, before we do this, let's give a quick recommendation on, from each of you. First of all, I'm talking to the ministers. Madam Minister Jarosinska-Jedynak, by the way, we have 2 polls on coming into the next part of our discussion. What would be your recommendation to business? What would be your expectation from business?
There's no doubt that business and other stakeholders have a vital role to play in reaching the objectives of the Paris Agreement. A constructive dialogue and partnership with international organizations, business, science, cities, and local government is of utmost importance. We have to underline that working together in partnership for climate change must be honest, carefully thought out, and based on understanding of these great challenges ahead of all of us. So I think that is my recommendation for that: partnership and working together.
Partnership and working together. Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. Davitashvili, Mr. Minister Davitashvili from Georgia, what are your recommendations and expectations from business?
The private sector has a key role in achieving these goals, but without governmental support, there is no way that if the government is not creating a framework for sustainable investments for private sector, public sector, there is no way for success. And I can just give you a brief example, very good example from my country, that one of the largest fertilizer company, Rustavi Azoty, is chemical fertilizer company. They contribute 5% of national greenhouse gas emissions. They will co-finance 50% with grants, new nitric acid absorption technologies. And they just can deliver, I guess, green technologies, and this is good for overall community. And this partnership demonstrates that the communication is key.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Very quickly, Yaroslav Demchenko, Mr. Minister, the Ukrainian recommendation to business.
in run business, and it's difficult for me to give any advice to people who are brave heroes. For me, business should strive to play a more important role in the framework of achieving the sustainable development goals. Therefore, given the global environmental challenges that the modern society faced, business should become more socially responsible and switch to the new model, aim at not just only achieving profit and economic growth, but also reducing the negative environmental impact and promoting long-term sustainable development. In Ukraine, given the environmental challenges, sustainable investment in and implementation of the infrastructure PPP project would be the best option for both business and to the country.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. We will have to include the second part of our panel session, and for that we would need a quick technical transition. Mrs. Voyachkova, Solorano, UN representative, thank you very much. And the ministers, Madam Yarosinska-Yedinak, Mr. Davitashvili, and Mr. Demchenko, thank you very much. For the viewers, please stay with us, be patient. We need 1 minute, and we will continue. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you.